As I probably mentioned earlier, my original experiences with the Atari 2600 were very limited. Most of my Atari education happened during the mid-90s through Activision's Atari, I think it was Atari Action Pack compilations for Windows PCs, which I got to play on one of my friend's PCs. I can't remember if he had these as originals, but the important thing is this introduced me to the world of emulation.
Some of the games I've already mentioned in the previous Atari 2600 episodes, but I'll continue with a few more, starting with an indisputable classic of adventure games, simply called Adventure. And it's considered as the first ever action-adventure game. It puts you into the shoes of a large pixel who must travel through a vast range of labyrinthian screens, pick up objects and take them to other places to open up more areas while trying not to get eaten by dragons. Adventure has 3 difficulty levels in which the simplest has only a small area to cover and very little to achieve. Call it the practice level. The second difficulty level gives you the full experience with predetermined spots for all the objects you need to pick up, while the third one randomizes the object locations. Sure, it looks and feels spectacularly simplistic now, but considering it basically created an entirely new genre, you can't expect too much. To me, though, one of the most important things in the game is that you can find the credit for the game's creator as an Easter egg, which as a concept was also completely unheard of in video games up to that point, and you didn't really see much of credits in games prior to this in any case. The lasting appeal of this game was recently exhibited in the movie adaptation of Ready Player One. I can't confirm whether it was featured in the original novel since I haven't had time to read it yet. My first experience of Adventure was, again, through emulation, but instead of the Activision compilations for Windows, this was the first game I ever played on the Stella emulator in 1996, which is now 25 years old, and still being updated. Anyway, for any gaming scholars, Adventure is one of those 1,000 games you need to play before you kick the bucket, and I'd say it wouldn't hurt for other gamers to play it either. The next game is something I had almost completely forgotten about until it was recently ported to the Commodore 64 by Antonio Savona, along with a few other classic Atari games. However, Frostbite by Activision was definitely one of those games I used to play a lot from the Atari Action Pack compilation. On a quick look, it looks just like another Frogger clone, but the way the game plays, as well as its premise, are very different. In Frostbite, you assume the role of Frostbite Bailey, who looks like a very peculiar depiction of either an Eskimo or an Arctic adventurer, and his job is to hop back and forth, down and up the moving ice platforms in order to build your igloo on the icy shore. Your job will be made more difficult by clams, snow geese, polar bears, king crabs, and even rapidly dropping temperature. And therein lies the beauty and complexity of this game. You have a time limit of sorts, but it's presented as a dropping temperature, so you need to get inside the finished igloo before you freeze to death. In a way, Frostbite combines elements from Frogger as well as Q*bert, but the dropping temperature element brings Frostbite its very own flavor and makes it an easily addicting game, and definitely a classic. Because it was released as late as August 1983, it's not necessarily one of the best known Atari 2600 games, but it should be, and I highly recommend any retro gaming fan to check it out. Another Activision title from the Atari 2600 to have gotten a recent C64 port that I used to play on a few occasions in the late 90s is Chopper Command. In essentials, it's not much more than a modified version of Defender, but if you compare the Atari version of Defender to Chopper Command, you will see the differences quite clearly. Not only is Chopper Command a bit nicer to look at, with no notable flashing happening between sprites, but the purpose of actually needing to keep the pedestrians alive, which in this case are trucks, is much more visible. Of course, in the original arcade version of Defender, this objective is much clearer. But as I said, in essentials, the two are the same game, and this one isn't a necessary gameplay experience by any means, while Defender is. The important thing to note here is that Chopper Command is much better than the Atari 2600 version of Defender, and that's why, if you're an Atari fan, you should have a go at it. The last two games for today were never released officially as PAL versions, so I can't actually record gameplay footage from a real Atari 2600. Instead, I've had to resort to using my 10-year-old Atari Flashback 3, which is close enough to the real thing in this case, but not close enough for me not to buy an actual Atari 2600 afterwards. Anyway, from the Atari Flashback 3 we have Canyon Bomber, an early classic from Atari. It's one of the simplest yet most aggravating and frustrating games you can think of when thinking of old Atari games, but that's what you get from an early arcade game. The idea is to fly over the canyon with a blimp or a biplane and bomb the heck out of it, hoping to hit the designated blocks you need to clear out of the canyon. You compete against either a computer or a human player for points, and that's really all there is to it. At least, that's what the original arcade Canyon Bomber was. The Atari port features a second game mode called Sea Bomber, in which you destroy ships instead of rocks, which is a nice alternative for such an otherwise simple concept. While Canyon Bomber isn't all that much to talk about, it certainly left a lasting legacy, providing a marked inspiration for the game Blitz for the VIC-20 and all its countless variations. But the Atari 2600 version of Canyon Bomber is the preferred choice for me. I've saved the best one to end the episode with. In 1982, Atari created the most complex space shooting arcade game not only up to that point, but also for a few years ahead. This game was called Gravitar. I'm including it here because I first came to play it as the Atari 2600 version, which was released in 1983, but that didn't happen until the late 90s, again. The first I ever heard of Gravitar was in connection to Thrust, a similar game on the Spectrum C64 and many other 8-bit computers, as well as OIDS for the Atari ST. Gravitar was considered as the progenitor of this particular genre, which is not just a multi-directional shooter, but more specifically cave-flying space shooter with high focus on gravity. In Gravitar, your mission is to clear planets of enemy bunkers and then shoot a reactor to get to the next universe. While shooting alien bunkers and spacecraft, you also need to watch out for your fuel gauge and pick up fuel pods whenever possible by using the tractor beam. If Space Invaders, Asteroids and Galaga stand for certain archetypes of shoot-'em-up classics, Gravitar stands proudly amongst them, and I highly urge every retro gaming enthusiast to dig into this one, but it was only released in NTSC format, so PAL gamers might experience some problems with real hardware and older TVs.